The first call, the one to Dennis, had been pure instinct, a synaptic firing of panic and need. The phone had felt slick and foreign in her sweat-damped palm. Each ring was a hammer strike against her ribs. When his voice, bright with distant sunshine and salt air, crackled through, her relief was so violent it felt like another contraction. "Dennis, where are you? My water broke. Come home right away." A beat of silence, filled only with the ghost of ocean waves and her own ragged breathing. Then, not concern, not urgency, but a flat, inconvenienced what? "That's impossible. I'm in Hawaii with Paulie right now." The words didn't parse. They were nonsense syllables, a burst of static. Hawaii, Paulie, now. They swirled in the air of the living room, where a single lamp fought a losing battle against the gathering dusk, and the cheerful, untouched baby blanket she'd been folding lay abandoned on the couch. "I'm not anywhere near you," his voice continued, a study in dismissive logic. "So why don't you call your parents?" The receiver slipped in her grip. He should have known. The date was circled in red on the kitchen calendar. Discussed intense, fleeting conversations he'd ended with a distracted pat on her belly. He should have been here, fumbling with the hospital bag, his face pale with a shared terror. Not there, not with her. A hot, searing wave, sharper than any labor pain yet, crested from her stomach to her throat. It was rage, pure and undiluted, but beneath it, cold and swift, rushed the primal understanding. There was no time for this, no time to scream, to smash the phone against the wall, to dissolve into the helpless, betrayed heap her body wanted to become. This urgency was bigger than his betrayal. It was biological, imperative. She hung up without another word, the click sounding final in the quiet room. Her fingers, trembling now, stabbed at the screen again. This time, the voice that answered was a lifeline, thick with immediate alarm. "Dad." "Allison? What's wrong?" Her father's voice, usually a steady rumble, was instantly sharp, fully present. "It's time. My water broke. And Dennis, he's not here." She choked on the last part, the humiliation giving it a bitter taste. "Where is he?" The question was a growl. "Hawaii." She squeezed her eyes shut, as if the word itself was a brand. "With Paulie." A volcanic silence. Then, tightly controlled, "We're on our way. Breathe, darling. Just breathe. We'll be there in 10 minutes." The wait was a solitary confinement of pain and trembling fury. Contractions began their serious, timed assault, each one a vice tightening around her spine. With each cresting wave, she saw them, Dennis and Paulie, silhouetted against a Pacific sunset, a cliché of escape. He was sipping a drink while she, Allison, gripped the arm of the sofa, her knuckles white, anchoring herself to a reality he had so casually abandoned. The sound of tires screeching to a halt outside was the sweetest symphony. Then, the heavy, frantic footfalls on the porch. The door flew open before she could move. Allison. Her father, his face a mask of fierce worry, filled the doorway. Behind him, a solid, calming presence. Rufus, his most trusted site manager, a man of few words and dependable strength. In his worn work jacket, he looked more like a guardian than an employee. Okay, we've got you," her father murmured, rushing to her side as another contraction seized her. His hands, rough from a lifetime in construction, were unexpectedly gentle as he helped her stand. "Lean on me, Miss Allison," Rufus said, his voice low and steady, offering his arm as a pillar. Between them, they half carried her to the company truck, its cab still smelling of sawdust and coffee. Her father climbed in beside her, his arm around her shoulders, his other hand clutching hers as she crushed his fingers with each new surge of pain. "Just look at me, sweetheart. Breathe. You're the strongest woman I know. You can do this." His words were a mantra, a tether to the world of the living, of those who showed up. The ride to the hospital was a blur of streetlights and pain, her father's steady voice cutting through the fog, Rufus's calm, focused driving eating up the miles. They formed a protective capsule around her, a stark, living contrast to the echoing absence of the man who should have been in the driver's seat. Later, in the harsh, bright victory of the delivery room, holding her red, squalling daughter, his daughter, the rage banked into a cold, hard coal in her chest. It was smothered momentarily by a flood of awe and a gratitude so profound it brought fresh tears for her father and for Rufus, who had waited anxiously in the hall. But as the adrenaline ebbed, the silence from the phone on the bedside table became a deafening roar. She had sent the message, "A girl. We're both okay. Room 407. Delivered. Read." No reply. The nurse brought the baby to her breast. A tiny, rooting miracle. As her daughter latched on with a surprising fierceness, Allison stared out the window at the darkening sky. Hawaii was what? 5 hours behind? He'd be having dinner now. Was Paulie laughing at something he said? Was he showing her a picture of his newborn child? Or was her birth merely an inconvenient notification on a phone he'd muted? The love she'd felt for Dennis, the future she'd imagined, didn't just feel broken. It felt like a fiction, a script he'd never agreed to perform. And in its place, gazing down at the vulnerable, perfect head of her child, a new resolve began to crystallize, cold and sharp as a diamond. It was no longer about heartbreak. It was about justice, about building a fortress so secure, a life so splendid, that his abandonment would become the foundational bedrock of their strength, not the chasm of their loss. She kissed her daughter's downy head, inhaling her clean, new scent. "It's just you and me now, little one," she whispered, the words of vow, "and we are going to be magnificent." Her father found her like that later, the baby sleeping in the clear bassinet, Allison's profile etched against the window, her expression not one of sad motherhood, but of grim, strategic calculation. It was the face she used to wear when staring at complex blueprints, finding the load-bearing wall that, if removed, would make the whole structure fail. "Allison," he said softly, "what a scary face you're making." She turned, the intensity in her eyes softening only a fraction. "Dad, how long have you been there?" "Long enough." "That look, is it about Dennis?" She nodded once, a sharp, decisive motion. "It's about what he owes her," she said, her voice low, glancing at her sleeping daughter. "It's about what he took from me, and it's about making sure he understands, in terms he cannot possibly ignore, the cost of his vacation." She reached for her father's hand, her grip firm. "I have a plan, but I'll need your help, and Rufus's expertise." The segment of the story ends here. On the precipice of action, the emotional landscape has been thoroughly surveyed, the shock, the primal urgency, the life-saving intervention, the quiet bonding, and finally, the metamorphosis of pain into a cold, clear plan. The stage is now set for the specifics of her revenge, a construction, she thinks, fitting for the daughter of a builder, to begin. Face? I unconsciously looked down at my sleeping daughter, her tiny chest rising and falling with the rhythm of angels. Before my gaze drifted to the rain-streaked hospital window, my own reflection was a ghost in the dark glass, a pale, sharp face framed by limp hair, eyes that held no softness, only a cold, simmering calculation. I tried to force a smile for my father's benefit, but it felt like a crack in stone. That's right, the visit wasn't just a comfort, it was an opportunity. The plan, born in the white-hot fury of betrayal and tempered in the silent, lonely hours of the maternity ward, was now fully formed. It was time to marshal my forces. "Dad," I began, my voice low but clear, cutting through the hum of the hospital room, "I have something to ask you. It's substantial. I'd like everyone at the company to help, too." His bushy eyebrows lifted, but he didn't interrupt. He simply pulled a chair closer, the familiar scent of his aftershave and pipe tobacco anchoring me. As I laid out the plan, detail by meticulous detail, I watched his face. He listened not as a doting grandfather, but as the president of Sanchez Sons Construction, a man who understood blueprints, logistics, and the unforgiving physics of structural demolition. I spoke of timelines, of asset transfers, of legal leverage, and of a very specific, symbolic act of destruction. When I finished, a heavy silence filled the room, broken only by Darla's soft sigh in her sleep. My father leaned back, crossing his arms, his knuckles scarred from a lifetime of honest work. "Allison, isn't that going a bit too far?" he finally rumbled, his tone not of disapproval, but of deep concern. "A man's home? You haven't even had a proper discussion with him since she was born. He hasn't seen his child." The time for discussion ended when he chose a beach in Maui over a delivery room. I said, the words ice in my mouth. "We're not busy at work right now, so the crew can handle it." But that's not the point. The point is, Dennis doesn't understand consequences. He understands transactions. He sees Paulie's need as a debt to be repaid, my labor as an inconvenience to be managed. I need to speak his language. I need to make the consequence so tangible he can't ignore it. So, please? I wasn't begging. I was stating a case. But I let my voice soften. Let him see the raw, wounded mother beneath the steel-clad strategist. He looked from my determined face to the innocent one in the bassinet, with a slow, resigned sigh that seemed to carry the weight of his own protective fury. He nodded. All right, Mija, we'll do it, for her. A week later, discharged from the hospital and cradling Darla like the treasure she was, I directed Rufus to make a small detour on the way to my parents' house. We stopped before a familiar plot of land, or what was left of it. Where our modest two-story house had once stood was now a flat, clean-swept lot. The air still carried a faint, sweet smell of sawdust and damp earth. The crew had done an impeccable job. Not a single nail, not a splinter of our former life remained. Only a single strand of yellow, caution tape strung between two stakes fluttered in the breeze. Tied to it, sealed in a clear plastic sleeve, was a manila envelope. My heart hammered not with guilt, but with a fierce, vindictive thrill. I had checked. Dennis's 2-week paternity leave, requested under the compassionate guise of my delivery, was ending. He'd be landing today, expecting to return to the comforting lie of his double life. The call came that evening, just as dusk painted my old childhood bedroom in shades of orange and purple. Darla was fed and sleeping in a borrowed crib. The phone vibrated on the nightstand like an angry insect. Hey, Dennis's voice was a shriek, stripped of all aloha calm. What the hell, Allison? Why is our house just an empty lot? What happened to my things? My medical texts? My clothes? Where are you? I let his panic hang in the air for a moment, savoring the sterile silence after his noise. I'll answer your questions, one at a time. My voice was calm, eerily steady. I explained the facts. The house was on my father's land, built by his company. It had been deconstructed, his belongings, boxed and shipped to his parents, whom I'd already called. His mother's tears and his father's stunned, apologetic silence had been a small, sad validation. He sputtered, grasping at straws of legal jargon he didn't understand. Then, I asked the question, did you see my letter, on the tape? I heard the crunch of gravel through the phone, a fumbling, then the rip of plastic. His silence was profound. Then, a wounded, incredulous roar. Divorce papers? Already signed by you? What have I done to deserve this? Oh, let's see. I mused, tracing a finger along Darla's blanket. Abandoned your wife in active labor. Falsified leave documents. Vacationed with another woman during the birth of your child. Emotional and financial abandonment. Shall I continue? Or do you need me to define grounds for divorce? It wasn't an affair, he blustered, the denial pathetic and immediate. Paulie was depressed. She needed a friend. Nothing happened. We have evidence. Dennis. I let the words drop like stones. Photos, audio, from the resort in Hawaii, courtesy of some very thorough site surveyors. The story unfolded then. The beautiful, twisted knot of fate. Rufus, my father's stoic right-hand man, hearing Paulie's name, his face, usually unreadable, had darkened with a painful recognition. Paulie Lopez, my ex-wife. The world had shrunk and tightened its noose in that moment. Rufus's quiet, efficient revenge had dovetailed perfectly with mine. His young, tech-savvy crew members, posing as tourists, had become the instruments of truth, gathering the evidence Dennis was now choking on. The line went dead. He'd hung up. I knew where he'd go, to the only shelter left. Paulie's apartment, the place Rufus had been forced to abandon. Rufus drove me there, his jaw set. You don't have to do this in person, he said, his voice a low growl. I do, I replied, staring straight ahead. I need to see his face when the last wall falls down. We found them in the shabby chic apartment Paulie had claimed in the divorce. She answered the door, her artificially tanned face collapsing from surprise to fear as she saw Rufus. Then me. Rufus? And, Allison? What is this? The universe balancing its books. Paulie, Rufus said, his voice devoid of any warmth she might remember. Dennis emerged from the bedroom, the divorce papers crumpled in his fist. He looked smaller, deflated, his Hawaiian tan suddenly seeming cheap and sickly. "Sign them, Dennis," I said, my tone that of a foreman closing out a job, "or we escalate." It was Rufus who masterfully turned the screw. He spoke not of heartbreak, but of debt, adultery compensation, unpaid from Paulie to him, and now, from both of them, to me. Dennis scoffed, puffing up with his remaining shred of arrogant pride. "Compensation? Fine. I'm a doctor. I can manage." But Rufus wasn't finished. He loomed, not with violence, but with an immovable, factual certainty that was far more terrifying. "And you will add a clause," Rufus instructed, his eyes locking on Dennis's, "relinquishing all parental rights and visitation. No contact with the child." Dennis's bravado evaporated. The true cost was now clear. It wasn't just money. It was his future, his lineage, his story. Paulie, seeing the predator in Rufus she'd once underestimated, began to babble promises of installment payments, her eyes wide with a fear she'd never shown during their marriage. "You people, you're like the mafia," Dennis finally whispered, the words slithering out in a mix of terror and awe. Rufus almost smiled. "A thin, cold thing. Until recently, everyone called me the vice boss." The color drained from Dennis's face completely. The unspoken history of the Sanchez family, our journey from a different kind of enterprise to legitimate, community-respected builders, clicked into place for him with horrifying clarity. My father's easy approval of our marriage, his parents' immediate trust, it took on a new, intimidating dimension. "You mean, your family is legitimate?" I finished for him, my voice flat. "But our loyalty is absolute, and our memory is long. You broke a contract, Dennis. This is the settlement." We left them there in that stale apartment, two ghosts already haunting each other, holding the signed papers that severed my past from my future. The final, poetic justice was not even my doing. Rufus, in a stroke of ruthless genius, had his tech-savvy surveyors anonymously deliver their damning evidence packet to the hospital's board. Dennis returned from his paternity leave, not to sympathetic colleagues, but to a terminated contract and a reputation in ashes. In a small medical community, such a scandal was a plague. No clinic would touch him. The final call came months later. His voice was a wheedling, broken thing. Paulie, drowning in her compensation debts, had turned her sharpness on him. The charmingly strong childhood friend was now a harridan with a kitchen knife and a vacuum cleaner. "Allison, please, a job at the company. Anything. I'll take the hazing. The rough guys." "My, what's this?" I said, Darla cooing in my lap. "You were so scared of our mafia company before." He painted a picture of pathetic domestic terror. I felt a flicker of pity, quickly extinguished. Helping him would be a crack in the door, a potential claim on Darla. "You made your bed, Dennis. You have a medical license. Figure it out." I hung up. He was an architect. Let him live in the ruin he'd built. The news of their arrest weeks later felt like a grim, inevitable epilogue. Desperate, naive, and broke, they'd stumbled into a shadowy online courier job that was, in fact, a front for a criminal network. Their pleas of ignorance were as useless as their denials of the affair had been. The justice system, unlike me, would not be swayed by tears. At the company, during our afternoon break, I shared the final chapter. The crew listened, a rapt audience of carpenters and masons. The greatest shock wasn't the arrest, nor even the original betrayal. "Chasing him with a knife?" One of the older bricklayers whistled, shaking his head. "Madre de Dios, we're rough, but we're not cruel. That Paulie, she's something else." No wonder Rufus got out fast. Another chimed in. Rufus himself nodded, a rare, full smile touching his lips as he looked around at his crew, our crew. "Sometimes," he mused, sipping his coffee, "the most dangerous people aren't the ones from our old neighborhood. They're the ones who think rules are for other people, the entitled ones." Paulie, she was a classic. Laughter, warm and communal, filled the break room. It was the sound of family, of shared history and hard-won peace. I am back at work now, the heiress apparent, learning the business from the ground up alongside Rufus, the most trusted vice president one could ask for. There are whispers among the crew, hopeful nudges about the two of us finding solace together. But Rufus is my partner in work, a brother in arms. My heart is full, with Darla's laughter, With the smell of sawdust and ambition. With the quiet strength of my father. Now the blissful, doting, hands-on grandpa, who runs our on-site daycare with more pride than he ever ran the company. The past is a cleared lot, swept clean. The future is a blueprint in my hands. And today, I pick up my tool belt and go to work, building something new, strong, and entirely our own.